The words left his mouth like chips of ice, sharp and sterile and utterly devoid of warmth. "I don't date black women," Dr. Jinwoo Park did not look up from the patient file he was reviewing, the stark white paper a perfect reflection of his world. Everything in his life was ordered, controlled, and monochromatic. The steel of his instruments, the starched white of his coat, the cool gray of the hospital walls. It was a palette of precision, and he had curated it with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to a surgical procedure. His colleague, Dr. Chun, sputtered, a coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Jinwoo, what decade are you living in? You can't just say things like that." Jinwoo finally lifted his eyes. They were dark, intelligent, and sealed off, like windows to an empty room. "It is not a moral declaration, Chen. It is a statement of fact, a personal preference, rooted in a lifetime of cultural and familial expectation. My father was very clear on the matter of legacy." The word legacy was a weight, a stone he carried in his chest. It was his inheritance, more tangible than money or property. It was a code, a set of unbreakable rules passed down from a man whose approval was the sun Jinwoo had orbited his entire life. Chun just shook his head, a gesture of weary disbelief. "He's been gone for 5 years, man. You're allowed to have your own preferences now." A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched Jinwoo's lips. "Some legacies are etched deeper than bone." He closed the file with a decisive snap, the sound echoing in the quiet doctor's lounge. "The woman you've arranged for me to meet tonight, what is her name?" Chun hesitated, a new, dreadful understanding dawning in his eyes. "Her name is Imani. She's an architectural historian. Brilliant, funny, and Jinwoo, you need to cancel." Jinwoo simply picked up his briefcase, his movements economical and precise. "I do not cancel appointments." He walked toward the door, his long gray coat settling over his shoulders like a shroud. "I will simply endure it for an hour, for your sake." "It changes nothing." The door swung shut behind him, leaving Chun in a silence that felt suddenly, horribly loud. He was the first to arrive, a deliberate act of control. The restaurant was a cathedral of modern cuisine, all dark wood, low light, and the hushed reverence of people paying a fortune for exquisitely small plates of food. Jinwoo chose a table in the corner, a strategic position from which he could observe all entrances and exits. He ordered a mineral water, the glass cold and sweating in his hand, a minor imperfection in an otherwise flawless environment. He was prepared for an hour of polite, meaningless conversation. He would be civil, detached, and utterly impenetrable. He would perform the social ritual his friend had foisted upon him, and then retreat back into the sterile safety of his world, the unfortunate matter of the woman's race a mere footnote in a wasted evening. Then she walked in, and the entire room tilted on its axis. It wasn't just that she was beautiful. The word felt inadequate, a blunt instrument for describing the symphony of her existence. She was wearing a dress the color of deep emerald, a slash of impossible life against the restaurant's muted tones. It clung to her form not with vulgarity, but with the grace of a second skin, a testament to the strength and elegance of the body it adorned. Her hair was styled in intricate braids that caught the light, each one a thread of spun obsidian. But it was her face, her presence, that undid him. She moved with a languid confidence, a self-possession so absolute it felt like a law of physics. When her eyes, warm and intelligent, scanned the room, he felt a jolt, a current of electricity that bypassed his brain and went straight to his heart, a muscle he had long considered dormant. She was a living, breathing refutation of the cold, dismissive sentence he had uttered only hours before. Imani. Her name was a melody, and as she approached his table, her expression shifting from searching to a polite, radiant smile, Jinwoo felt the carefully constructed walls of his world begin to fracture. The ice in his veins was melting, turning into a raging, unfamiliar fire. He, who prided himself on his unshakable composure, could not breathe. He had built his life on a foundation of inherited prejudice, a doctrine of cold, hard lines. And this woman, this impossible woman in a green dress, was about to burn it all to the ground. "Dr. Park?" Her voice was even richer than he had imagined, a low, smooth cadence that seemed to vibrate in the air around him. He managed to stand, a jerky, uncoordinated movement that felt entirely alien to his usually fluid grace. The man who could hold a life in his hands with unwavering stillness suddenly felt like a clumsy adolescent. "Imani, please," he said, his own voice sounding rough, unfamiliar. She smiled, a genuine, luminous thing that made the dim restaurant feel brighter. She extended a hand, and he took it, his skin registering the warmth of hers as a shock. It was a simple handshake, a common courtesy, yet it felt like an irrevocable pact. He was touching fire, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he would carry the brand of it forever. The first 15 minutes of their date were a study in dissonance. He was a mess of internal contradictions, his mind a battlefield where his father's ghost waged a desperate war against the living, breathing woman in front of him. He asked the standard questions about her work, her interests, but he wasn't merely listening to the answers.
He was consuming them.
He watched the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of Gothic architecture, the way her hands moved to illustrate a point about flying buttresses, the subtle curve of her lips when she found something amusing. He had intended to be bored. Instead, he was utterly, hopelessly captivated. Imani, for her part, was a master of graceful composure, yet she could not miss the intensity of his gaze. She felt it on her like a physical touch, a focused, burning curiosity that was both flattering and deeply unsettling. "Is something wrong, doctor?" she asked, her head tilted slightly. "You seem distracted." He had been staring, he realized, not at her, but into her, as if trying to solve a complex medical puzzle. "Forgive me," he said, forcing his hands to rest flat on the table, an attempt to anchor himself. "Your work is fascinating. The idea of buildings holding memory, of history being encoded in stone and glass, it's a language I don't speak. Everyone speaks it," she countered gently. "You just have to learn how to listen." The conversation flowed from there, but the undercurrent of his obsession never waned. He found himself revealing things, small, inconsequential details about his grueling residency, his frustration with hospital bureaucracy, things he never discussed. He was trying to build a bridge to her, frantically, clumsily, laying down planks of conversation over the chasm of his own prejudice. He was trying to erase the man he had been that morning. "I don't normally enjoy these derangements," he admitted, the words feeling heavy and true. "My friend can be overly persistent." "Mine too," she laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "She said I needed to meet someone who wasn't a dusty manuscript or a crumbling facade." His heart clenched. He was a crumbling facade. And for the first time in his life, he was terrified of what lay beneath. He remembered the rain. It was always raining in his father's memories. The old man would sit in his study, the scent of cedar and old paper thick in the air, and speak of Seoul not as a vibrant metropolis, but as a place of hardship and rigid order. He would talk about the family line, a concept that felt almost mythical to a young Jin-woo growing up in the manicured suburbs of America. "We are the Parks," his father would say, his voice a low rumble of absolute authority. "Our name is not just a sound. It is a vessel. It carries the blood, the honor, the sacrifices of every generation before you. Your duty is not to your own happiness. It is to that vessel. You must not crack it." Jin-woo was 12 when he first understood what that meant. He had made friends with a boy from a different neighborhood, a boy whose parents were laborers, whose laughter was too loud, whose clothes were never quite new. When his father found out, he didn't yell. He simply sat Jin-woo down in the cedar-scented study and laid out the map of their world. There were circles of acceptability, concentric rings of social and cultural purity. Their circle was small, exclusive, and unforgiving. "They are not like us," his father had explained, his voice patient, as if teaching a scientific principle. "Their world has different rules, different expectations. To mix with them is to dilute our strength. It is to disrespect the vessel." The friendship was quietly, coldly terminated. Years later, during his first year of medical school, Jin-woo had fallen for a woman. She was brilliant, a fellow student, passionate and kind. She was also Filipina. For 3 months, he lived a double life, a life of vibrant color and genuine emotion that he kept hidden from the monochromatic world of his family. He thought he could manage it, that he could keep the two worlds separate. He was wrong. His father discovered it through a concerned family friend. The confrontation was not in the study. It was in the sterile, unforgiving light of the hospital cafeteria. His father did not raise his voice. He simply looked at his son with a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. "I thought I had raised you to understand," he said, his words like surgical steel. "This is not a matter of preference. It is a matter of preservation. This family did not survive wars and poverty and upheaval to be dissolved by a moment of foolish infatuation. You are a Park. You will marry a Korean. You will produce heirs who carry our legacy untainted. This is your one and only purpose beyond your medicine." Jin-woo had looked across the cafeteria and saw her laughing with her friends, so full of life and light. And in that moment, he made a choice. He chose the vessel. He chose the legacy. He broke her heart, and in doing so, he calcified his own. He became the man in the gray coat, the man who could say, "I don't date black women," with the same dispassionate certainty as diagnosing a common ailment, because to him, it was just another rule in a lifetime of them. The crisis arrived not with a bang, but with a frantic, late-night email. A water main had burst in the sub-basement of the hospital's new heritage wing, the project Imani had been meticulously curating for the past 2 years. Blueprints, historical artifacts, and priceless preliminary sketches were in immediate danger. An emergency preservation and structural assessment meeting was called for midnight. When Jin-woo, summoned for his role on the hospital's board oversight committee, walked into the conference room, he saw her immediately. Imani was standing over a massive, unrolled blueprint, her face etched with a focused intensity that made her even more compelling. She wasn't wearing an emerald dress now. She was in practical trousers and a simple black sweater, her hair pulled back, but she commanded the room with the same effortless authority. She was surrounded by flustered administrators and grim-faced engineers, yet she was the clear center of gravity. Her presence was a jolt to his system, a painful reminder of the dinner 2 weeks prior, after which she had politely but firmly declined a second date, citing a demanding work schedule, a rejection he knew was more than just about time. "The water is contained," she was saying, her voice calm and clear over the anxious murmurs, "but the humidity levels in the archival vault are already critical. The structural integrity of the west-bearing wall is also a concern. Given the saturation," she looked up then, and her eyes met his. There was no warmth, no recognition of their shared dinner, only a cool, professional acknowledgement. It was a dismissal more profound than any angry words could have been. For the next 3 hours, they were forced into a reluctant alliance. Jin-woo, with his methodical, analytical mind, was tasked with assessing potential biohazard risks from mold and ensuring the safety protocols for the restoration teams. Imani, with her encyclopedic knowledge of the building's history and materials, directed the artifact rescue. They orbited each other, their paths crossing over damp schematics and urgent phone calls. He watched her, mesmerized by her competence. She was not just a historian. She was a leader, a fierce protector of the past. In her, he saw a dedication to legacy that mirrored his own, but hers was a legacy of beauty, of preservation, of culture shared with the world. His was a legacy of exclusion, of bloodlines and closed doors. The contrast was a blade twisting in his gut. He saw the way she inspired loyalty in her team, the respect in the engineer's eyes as she pointed out a detail they had missed. And he felt a sickening wave of shame for the crude, dismissive label he had tried to put on her, on an entire race of women, all to honor a dead man's suffocating pride. The hours bled together, fueled by bad coffee and the adrenaline of the crisis. By 4 a.m., the main conference room had cleared out, leaving only a handful of essential personnel. Jin-woo found Imani in a small, forgotten records office, carefully examining a 19th-century medical journal that had suffered minor water damage. The room was cold, the only light coming from a single desk lamp that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. It created an island of intimacy in the cavernous, sleeping hospital. She was so absorbed in her work, she didn't hear him enter. He noticed a slight tremor in her hands and saw the dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes. "You should rest," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She startled, looking up at him. The professional mask was gone, replaced by a weary vulnerability. "There's no time. This binding is delicate. If I don't stabilize it now, The pages could fuse. He stepped closer, his medical instincts taking over. He gently took the book from her and placed it on a dry blotter. Then he took her hands in his. They were ice cold. "You're shaking," he stated, his voice now purely clinical, yet the touch was anything but. He began rubbing her hands, the friction creating a small pocket of warmth in the chilled room. For a moment, she allowed it, her tired eyes closing. The silence was profound, filled only by the hum of a nearby computer and the sound of their breathing. "Why are you being kind to me, doctor?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't about the cold hands. It was about the intense dinner, the polite rejection, and his continued presence in her orbit. He stopped rubbing her hands, but didn't let go. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the lie he'd been living became unbearable. "My name is Jinwoo," he said, the words feeling momentous. "And I think my entire life has been a form of malpractice." The admission was cryptic, but it was honest. It was the first truly honest thing he had said to her. She searched his face, her gaze probing, trying to understand the man behind the cold, competent doctor. She saw the conflict there, the deep, sorrowful regret that seemed to swim in the depths of his dark eyes. She slowly pulled her hands away, the loss of contact feeling like a sudden chill. "I don't understand you, Jinwoo," she said, her voice laced with a confusion that mirrored his own. "I'm not sure I do either," he confessed, the admission costing him a mountain of pride. "But I am beginning to." The revelation came a week later, delivered with the casual cruelty of office gossip. Imani was meeting with Dr. Chun to finalize the restoration timeline for the Heritage Wing. As they were wrapping up, Chun, who had witnessed Jinwoo's consuming fascination with Imani, made a clumsy attempt at matchmaking. "I'm glad you two are hitting it off," he said with a well-meaning smile. "Jinwoo's a good man, just stuck in his ways. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. It's a miracle." Honestly, Imani offered a polite, non-committal smile. "He's been very helpful during the crisis," Chin chuckled, shaking his head. "Helpful doesn't cover it. Obsessed is more like it." Which is insane, when you consider what he said to me right before your date. A cold dread, colder than the records office had been, began to seep into Imani's bones. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Chin, oblivious, forged ahead. "Oh, just some of that old-world nonsense his father drilled into him. He was being an idiot. He told me, flat out, 'I don't date black women, can you believe it?' And then you walked in wearing that green dress and completely short-circuited his brain." It was poetic justice. The world stopped. The cheerful chatter from the hallway outside, the hum of the hospital lights, the very air in her lungs, it all ceased to exist. There was only the sentence, echoing in the cavernous silence of her mind. "I don't date black women." It wasn't just an insult. It was a negation. It was a dismissal of her entire being before she had even entered the room. Every moment they had shared was instantly recast in a sickening new light. His intense gaze wasn't fascination, it was shock. His surprise at her intelligence wasn't admiration, it was the astonishment of a bigot discovering a unicorn. His kindness in the records room wasn't intimacy, it was the confused penance of a man confronting a crack in his vile worldview. She wasn't a person to him. She was an exception, an anomaly, a beautiful, surprising specimen that challenged his neatly categorized prejudice. The shame was a hot, coiling serpent in her stomach. The fury was a wildfire. She stood up, her movements stiff. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Chun," she said, her voice a flawless sheet of ice. She walked out of his office and straight to the surgical wing where she knew Jinwoo would be finishing his rounds. She found him at a nurse's station and she didn't wait. "I know what you said," she stated, her voice low but carrying with lethal precision. He turned, a hopeful smile starting on his face when he saw her, a smile that died instantly when he saw the look in her eyes. "Imani, you don't date black women," she continued, the words tasting like poison. "Was I the first experiment? Did I perform to your satisfaction? Tell me, doctor, what conclusions did you draw from your little study?" Her voice never rose, but every word was a scalpel, cutting away at the fragile connection they had built, exposing the diseased tissue beneath. He was speechless, the truth of her accusation rendering him mute. His silence, was the only confession she needed. She gave a single, devastating nod. I see. You have your data. Please lose my number. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime. For Jinwoo, it was a period of brutal self-excavation. Imani's words had shattered the mirror he held up to himself, and he was forced, for the first time, to look at the ugly, distorted reflection. He confronted his father's legacy not as a sacred text, but as a toxic inheritance. The confrontation wasn't with a ghost. It was with himself, with the doctrines he had accepted, without question. He took a leave of absence from the hospital, a move that shocked his colleagues, and flew to Seoul. He walked the streets his father had described, but he didn't see a city of rigid order. He saw a place of dynamic, chaotic, beautiful life. He visited museums, listened to music, and spoke to people his father would have deemed unsuitable. He was deprogramming himself, one painful realization at a time. He returned to America a different man, quieter, sadder, but with an unfamiliar clarity in his eyes. He sold his father's house, the one with the cedar-scented study, and used the money to anonymously establish a scholarship fund for minority students in the arts and humanities at the local university. He named it the Emerald Grant. He went back to work, but the arrogant, cold precision was gone, replaced by a gentler, more patient bedside manner. He was a better doctor, a better man, but he was hollowed out by her absence. Imani, meanwhile, had poured her pain into her work. The Heritage Wing restoration was a triumph, completed ahead of schedule and under budget. She received a prestigious award for her efforts and was lauded in architectural journals. She moved through the world with her head held high, her dignity an impenetrable armor. She dated, but superficially. No one could get past the walls she had erected. The memory of Jinwoo's betrayal was a constant, low-grade ache, a reminder that even the most beautiful facades could hide rotten foundations. She never spoke of him, but sometimes, late at night, she would remember the feeling of his hands warming hers in the cold records office, a moment of genuine connection that made the subsequent pain all the more acute. They lived in the same city, 2 planets in separate, lonely orbits, forever altered by a collision they could never forget. The silence between them was a testament to the chasm his words had created, a void that seemed impossible to ever cross. The dedication ceremony for the Heritage Wing was a grand affair. The city's elite were in attendance, a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, but all eyes were on Imani. She stood at the podium, bathed in a soft spotlight, looking regal in a gown of midnight blue. She spoke with eloquence and passion about the power of history, about the stories our buildings tell, and about the importance of preserving a collective memory that includes all voices. She was magnificent. Jinwoo stood at the back of the crowded atrium, a ghost in a well-tailored suit. He had not been invited, but he had to be there. He had to see her one more time. Watching her, so poised and powerful, he felt the full, crushing weight of his foolishness. He had almost broken this extraordinary woman with a stupid, inherited prejudice. He had almost allowed his father's dead hands to ruin the most alive thing he had ever encountered. When she finished her speech to thunderous applause, a moderator stepped up to handle a brief Q&A session. A few predictable questions were asked and answered. Then a silence fell. Jinwoo's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was the only chance he would ever have. He raised his hand. The moderator, surprised to see a hand from the very back, nodded at him. Yes, you in the back. Jinwoo stepped forward into the aisle, and a murmur went through the crowd as people recognized the prominent surgeon. Imani's smile froze on her face. Her eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he was halfway to the stage, ensuring everyone could see and hear him. He was not hiding anymore. He took the offered microphone. This isn't a question, he began, his voice clear and steady, though it cost him everything he had. It's a public apology. A collective gasp rippled through the atrium. 6 months ago, I said something ignorant, racist, and unforgivable about the brilliant woman standing on that stage. I judged her and all women who look like her, based on a toxic ideology I inherited and was too weak to question. He looked directly at Imani, his eyes pleading. My words were not a preference. They were a prejudice. They were the result of a profound moral failing, and there is no excuse. Imani, you are a woman of immense grace, intelligence, and dignity. You tried to show me a better way to be, and I failed you. I am sorry. I am deeply and truly sorry for the pain I caused you, and for the man I was when we met. He set the microphone down on an empty chair and turned, walking back down the aisle and out of the atrium without a backward glance, leaving behind a stunned silence and a woman on a stage whose carefully constructed composure had been utterly and completely demolished. The silence in the atrium was absolute. It was a breathless, suspended moment where 200 people collectively held their breath, their gazes shifting from the empty doorway Jinwoo had just disappeared through to the woman frozen in the spotlight. Imani stood perfectly still, her hands gripping the edges of the podium, her knuckles white. Her face was a mask of conflicting emotions, shock, pain, confusion, and something else, something fragile and raw that she had kept hidden for half a year. The moderator, flustered, stammered something about concluding the evening, but no one was listening. All the air had been sucked out of the room, replaced by the weight of Jinwoo's public confession. Imani didn't hear the applause that eventually, uncertainly, started. She didn't feel the hands on her back guiding her from the stage. Her mind was a maelstrom. It was a monstrous, humiliating act. He had laid bare the ugly secret between them for the entire city to see, turning her private pain into a public spectacle. It was also the bravest, most honest thing she had ever witnessed. He hadn't made excuses. He hadn't tried to justify his past. He had simply named his sin, taken full ownership of it, and apologized without any expectation of forgiveness. It was a gesture so radical, so complete in its self-immolation, that it defied easy categorization. He had not done it to win her back. He had done it because it was the truth, and the truth, he had decided, needed to be said aloud, consequences be damned. Later that night, sitting in her silent apartment, the midnight blue dress pooled at her feet, Imani looked up the new scholarship at the university, the one everyone had been talking about. The Emerald Grant. Her breath caught in her chest. It was a quiet act of penance, a hidden gesture that sought no credit, no applause. It was an attempt to build something beautiful out of the wreckage he had made. The public apology was for her. The grant was for the world he had wronged. The two acts together formed a complicated, painful, and undeniably powerful statement. The chasm between them was still there, a deep and treacherous canyon carved by a single, cruel sentence. But now, for the first time, it seemed as if someone had begun the arduous, near-impossible work of building a bridge. She looked out at the city lights, the past and the present warring within her. What does one do when a man demolishes your faith, only to then rebuild it, brick by painful brick, in front of the entire world? Can a foundation so poisoned ever truly be considered safe? Forgiveness, she realized, was not a simple act of absolution. It was a complex and terrifying landscape, and she was standing at its edge, unsure if she had the strength to take the first step. The story was not over. The final chapter had yet to be written. And what would you do? Would you walk across that bridge?